Good evening, everyone. We're going to give it a few moments to allow everyone time to join us, but so happy that you are here. So again, we'll just give it a few moments. And I see the number is going up of people joining us this evening. So we will just wait a few more moments and that way people can join us. But while people are joining us, I see, we'll wait maybe another minute, you think, Amy? Okay. All right, welcome. Right? Looks like the number has slowed down from people joining us, and I want to be respectful of our time, everyone's time, since it is an evening program. And so we're happy that people are joining us. So, Amy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. We thank you guys all for joining us tonight on this Tuesday for the mini Camp College admissions workshop, specifically talking about the highly selective admissions process. My name is Amy Ruff. I am currently a college counselor at Pace Academy, but previously have worked at the University of Michigan. And so I'm really excited to share with you guys some of my experiences and knowledge base coming most recently from the college side, as I'm a new high school counselor.
Yes, and we're so happy and thrilled to have Amy joining us this evening. My name is Sarbeth Fleming. I am the Associate Dean of Admissions at Emory University. And it was like Amy and I did tag team, right? Because Amy went from the college side to the high school at the exact same time I went from the high school side back to the college side. And so we have experienced on what people like to call both sides of the desk, but also I worked at a community-based organization as well. And so feel free throughout this presentation. We wanted to be as interactive as possible to make sure that we are answering your questions. And to do that, we would like to know who's joining us. And so I'm going to try and launch a poll. So do you see a poll? Oh, perfect. So if everyone could go in and answer this poll, that would be great, just so that we can get a sense of who we have with us. So okay, Georgia, Florida, I see you. South Carolina, I used to actually recruit and travel in South Carolina. Tennessee is here as well. Let's see, Georgia's winning a little bit. This is like looking at, I can see, I don't know if you all can see, but I can see.
Yeah.
Okay, so Alabama is coming on strong now, so we are happy. And so knowing what grade and who is here, so we have a ninth grader, welcome. 10th, 11th, high school professional, parents, their parents are winning. I'm a parent, young parent, independent counselor consultant. So we have a good group, and a lot of people, this is their first one. So the vast majority, first one. So I'll give it maybe 10 more seconds, and then I'll post the results so that everyone can see our results. So, all right, I think that's about everyone. And who won? Ding, 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 ding. And there. So can you see? Perfect. Like it's always technology, it was. So Georgia, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, which is my home. I love North Carolina, so happy. South Carolina, Tennessee, that is great. 9th, 10th, 11th grade. So it is never too early to start, but what I will say is the process changes every single year. So take the information in, but make sure that you're following up with the colleges and things of that nature. And we have people, so many first-time people. So thank you for joining us. Before we leave for the evening, we have been putting on a campus college admission workshop at least once a month for the past year. So I will put the link in the chat before we leave tonight, so that way, if you want to go back and look at some of the previous topics, you can definitely do that. All right. So next, we are going to talk about selective admissions today. And so let's think about, what does selective admissions mean? And if you don't know, I didn't say this, I used to be a teacher, Amy. And so I like to ask questions and polls. So let's see if people really know what that topic is. So I do have 3 questions. If you just jump into the poll and answer those questions, I'll give everyone about a minute to answer these questions so that we can all be on the same page. And then we will get started on our presentation. Okay. Right. All right. Okay. So let's see. There are approximately blank colleges considered highly selective in the U.S. And as Amy knows, there's over 4,000 colleges right in the U.S. There are so many colleges. I learn about a different one every single day. And so how many are considered selective or highly selective? And so I see people answering. See, percentage, that's a great one. And to be considered selective admissions, what percentage of the applicant pool do they accept? And highly selective colleges are private. Are they? Let's see. And so I am going to close the poll. There's about 2 or 3 more people that hadn't voted. So let's vote. And then I am going to close the poll. All right, let's see, what is the answer? And here we go. So as you can see, there are almost 4,000 colleges in the US, right? And about 50 of those are considered highly selective. So not a lot at all when you're really thinking about all of the options of colleges out there. Not a lot are considered highly selective. What does it even mean to be highly selective? Maybe you want to take that one about what does it mean and why is that even a number?
So you do highly selective colleges, number 2. I think it's important to really think about what does it mean. Sometimes it's just numbers, but also, as we're going to dive into later on in the presentation, it's also a methodology of how they review. But before we get there, of the how do they review, number 2, the colleges that are considered selective admit blank percentage of their applicant pool. We always find this really interesting, and the metrics have changed over time. So if you have been around the college admissions process for a bit, some of these answers may seem all right to you. And so it right. Depends. The less than 25% or the more than 10% are the ones that got the votes. And I believe now it is the no more than 10%. Is it, Sarbeth? Or is it
so they're less than 25%,
okay.
No more than 10%. It's only about 16, 17 colleges out of that 50 that admit less than 10%. But like Amy is saying, the numbers are changing. It's ever flowing, ever changing, but less than 25%. And then the last one, highly selective colleges are all private. And the answer to that is false. Amy's joining us, and where Amy used to work was considered a highly selective institution, University of Michigan, Georgia Tech, if you're here in Georgia. So public schools are also can be highly selective. So don't let that term change how you're looking or thinking of a school. Like Amy said, it's literally the acceptance rate. How many applicants apply, how many people are accepted. So let's jump into our presentation. Oh, and I shared it. Yes, I did share. So let's jump right into our presentation here.
Perfect. So when we're talking about, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, in talking about understanding selective admission, there's so many components that go into a student's application and so many things that admissions officers on the other side of the application are considering. And so many times when students are going through, and I know we have some ninth graders here, we have some 10th graders, we have parents, we have all different types of people that are involved in the admissions process in the room. But it's important for us to give you kind of an umbrella of what are we talking about when the student gets to junior or senior year and they're putting together their application documents and they're really reflecting on their high school experience and making sure that their application is representative of them, because highly selective colleges are going to be looking not only at the transcript as it exists at face value, but they're diving into what that transcript means. Those intentional choices over the 4 years, regardless of which class you took, how did you master the content in that class? Whether it was an entry-level class, an honors class, an AP class, maybe your high school offers the IB curriculum. Highly selective colleges are expecting to see high performance in a wide range of areas. So that we talked a little bit about the transcript. We talked a little bit, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper in curriculum soon enough. But from there, we also have test scores. Test scores are something that played a much larger role prior to the pandemic, but I would say now they play a less significant role because so many schools across the country have decided to be test optional. And so if you wanted to submit test scores and you think they're reflective of your academic abilities, schools recommend that. If you don't want to, you're not required to for many schools across the country. So previously, about 3 years ago, this was a significant piece of the admissions process. And now it is a less significant piece and sometimes even non-existent. And so it's important to understand those are just purely numbers.
Right.
What colleges who are highly selective really dive deeply into, because those are expectations of performance and that many students are going to have. What makes you distinctive are those qualitative factors. And that's one of those things that I think not a lot of people understand about the admissions process is a lot of it is based on writing. Students having their own independent, authentic voice coming through in the application can be a significant factor. I know at Michigan, we not only had one essay that we read, the general application essay, but we also had 3 supplemental essays that were specific to our school that we really wanted students to be mindful and thoughtful of when considering us as a community to join. And so that writing piece of it is something that comes into play. Letters of recommendation are also significant, as I used to read many of them. And now this year I had the honor of writing them for students and getting to know them on a personal basis and being able to advocate for them through a letter was a really fascinating experience. And so there are so many pieces in this process. We can't forget about what you do outside of the classroom, because highly selective colleges, if you look at the schools that fall into that category, one of the things that they talk about is how engaged their student life is and how active their community is and how enriching the experiences both in the classroom and beyond the classroom. And that's one of the factors that attracts students to their school. So what's one of the things that you would expect them to look for in the admissions process? A student in high school who is already doing that so they can make that successful transition from high school to college. And so those are some of the things that highly selective institutions are really taking the time to dive into specifically to figure out about you as a student and how are you going to translate to our campus, both academically and beyond the classroom. So there's so many factors.
Yes. I didn't say this earlier. Please feel free to use the Q&A box.
Yes.
And so we want to make sure that we're answering every question that you have. The one thing I'll say about this slide here is about the strategic application, right? What does that mean? And what that means is really thinking about the application plans. What do I mean by that? Some colleges apply early decision. Emory, we're an early decision school, meaning if you apply early, then if you are admitted, you are saying, I will withdraw my application. I'll go into Ms. Ruff's office if I'm a student of hers, and I'll say, yeah, I got accepted to Emory early decision. I'm going to withdraw my application from every other school because I'm telling Emory, if admitted, I will come. Some colleges are early action. UGA is a great example of early action. You apply early, you find out early, but you can wait and hear from all of your colleges before you have to withdraw your application. And so there's some, and working with your college counselor, talking to the school, there's some benefits, right, of applying early or early decision, because you're telling the school, if admitted, you are my number one choice, I will come. You're applying early, so they may not see their overall application pool. So at the time that you apply, you may be the first Eagle Scout or the only Eagle Scout or Gold Award recipient in the pool, but if you're waiting until all the applications are considered, you may be one of hundreds. And so there is some strategy behind that. And then demonstrated interest. Not all schools consider demonstrated interest. I want to be very clear with that. Even in my signature now at Emory, and Amy, I don't know if you saw it, my Emory work signature says, Emory does not track demonstrated interest, meaning you can meet me, you can email me multiple times. None of that will be considered when we're looking at your application. We don't consider if you come to our campus to visit. None of that is taken into account. Some schools will track demonstrated interest. Did you come to their college campus? When they came to your high school, did you come and visit? You can, at a college fair, I used to tell students the easiest way to see if a school really demonstrated interest at a college fair is if they have a form and they want you to fill it out and give it back to them. That means they're going to go back and enter that into the system. And so not all schools do that, but some colleges will look at demonstrated interest. I worked at another college, and we factored that in as much as we factored in the SAT and the ACT score. And so taking that into account.
Yeah. Colleges definitely want people they know are equally as interested in them to enroll. And so when they're thinking about whether or not to admit you, if they do track demonstrated interest, you want to make sure that you play that card like they're asking you to show your genuine interest. When we're talking about, and we're going to kind of toggle back to academic performance, because this is typically what leads the process, no matter where you're applying to a highly selective school, because what you're coming to them for, first and foremost, is your education. And so what they're hoping to see is, based on the high school that you're at, you're doing a couple different things. You are maximizing the curriculum that's available to you, and you're doing well in the classes that you're choosing to take. So first, we're going to talk about the GPA, and GPAs can kind of be all over the board. When I was at Florida State, we worked on a weighted 4.0 scale for core academic classes. So that was English, math, natural science, social science, world languages, and an A in a honors class was a 4.0 or a 4.5, and an A in a regular class was a 4.0, and an A in an AP class was a 5.0. And so it went from there. And so GPAs were all over the place, but we recalculated them based on our interests. I then went to Michigan, and at the University of Michigan, they do an unweighted cumulative GPA. And so an A is a 4.0, a B is 3.0, a C is a 2.0, and that was it. And they counted every class that existed on your transcript. When it came to now I'm at Pace Academy, they're actually on a 100-point scale. And so it is completely different. And so transcripts, keep in mind, transcripts as you are sending them are going to be read differently depending on the school. So as you are going through these virtual events, or you're meeting with an admissions officer, it's going to be a really great question to ask is, how do you evaluate GPAs? Now I see a question in the chat about dual enrollment. So I keep saying AP or IB. Dual enrollment is equivalent at many institutions to the highest level of rigor. So it would be equivalent to an AP or an IB often, but it's important to ask that qualifying question when you're talking to the admissions officer, because not every school does it that way. When looking at the screen, there's a kind of 3 different columns about the unweighted GPA, the weighted GPA, and the core unweighted GPA. So each school I talked about did some version of these. You don't always have to know exactly how to do it yourself, but it's important to understand that there are distinctions between each category. And at one school, they may say your recalculated GPA is a 3.87, and that another school may say that it's a 4.1. And that will help you kind of distinguish. One school might be weighting, or one school is counting cumulatively, or one school is counting core academic classes. But keep in mind the GPA, once again, is just a number. And how you got there is oftentimes where highly selective schools spend most of their time evaluating. It's also important, I believe it's the next slide, where we talk a little bit about classes. Oh, no, it's not. Classes, I wanted to go back to the last slide of talking a little bit more about, there's a difference between high school graduation requirements and a difference between what colleges and universities expect from you. And so oftentimes, I know here in Georgia, sometimes you only need to take 2 foreign language classes. Well, that may complete your high school graduation requirement, and that's wonderful. If you are not a language person, maybe that's not where you double down. But if you're doing well in that language, there is a benefit to continuing and sustaining that course throughout your high school career for a couple of reasons. One is that's going above and beyond what's required of you, which is what highly selective schools are looking for. And there's the added benefit of you're likely at a highly selective college going to be taking a language, especially if they're based in the liberal arts. And so it's important to have that continuity to make sure that you start off on a good foot your first year of college. So there's a lot of benefits of continuing something like a language, or oftentimes you may only need 4 years of math, but at highly selective schools, they're going to be expecting you to get to the second highest or the highest math that's offered by your high school. So think about those pieces, especially the 9th graders and 10th graders in the room, and parents as they're guiding their children through this process. Those are some of the things highly selective institutions find as differentiating factors for their applicants.
So testing, so like Amy mentioned, testing, it has been all over the board, especially recently, but there are some schools that still require the test. So pay attention when you are looking at schools. Back when I worked at a school in North Carolina, I'll just say it because if you Google me, you find my bio. When I worked at Davidson College, at that time, a couple of years ago, we required tests. Wake Forest, they haven't required tests in over a decade. And so students would come and apply to Davidson and say, oh, but you don't require tests. Like, did you visit Wake Forest the same day you visited Davidson? And they're like, yes. It's like, they don't require a test. We do. Davidson at this point, they don't, because a lot of schools have gone test optional, but you want to make sure that when you're visiting the different schools, you're really writing down and keeping track of what's required and when. There are some schools that are test optional. And I will say this, I've heard this question many times. Test optional is just that. If it is going to benefit you, submit it. If it is, I have seen students submit tests and they actually will say, this test is not it doesn't represent my academic abilities. If we're test optional, once you submit it, we have to consider it. And so if it's test optional and it's not highlighting you, you don't have to send it to a certain school unless they're required, right? And you pick and choose. So you may send it to school A, but not school B. But if a school is test optional or test flexible, some test flexible schools will say, you need to send us a test. It can be an AP exam. It can be an IB exam. And so some places will say, if you don't submit a test, you need to submit a graded paper. That caught a lot of students by surprise because they didn't keep graded papers, right? And so you really want to make sure that you're reading what does that mean when about tests and looking at the college's statistics. What are they putting out? What are they saying their middle 50? And if I'm above that, then yes, let me submit it. If I'm below it, it may depend. And that's where I would really look and decide, will this score benefit me? Will it enhance my application? Because your score is in context, right? So you may have a great test score, but if you're applying for an engineering program, for example, and your math score is your weakest score, that may not be the test you want to submit. So thinking about the context, looking at your school, most schools, well, pretty much every high school has what's called the high school profile by the counseling office. I would say if you are a parent and you have not seen your students' high school profile, reach out to the high school, look on the website, because that's what the colleges are doing to understand the high school. So when I'm reading a high school application and I see a test score, I can look at the high school profile and say, this is one of the strongest test scores from this particular high school. So I'm not looking at it in a vacuum. And so really paying attention in the dual enrollment, looking and seeing AP, IB, will a school take credit if I make a certain score? Not all schools do. Right? Some schools will say we will take only up to 12 hours. Some schools will say no. Some schools will say we'll take up to 20 hours. So looking and paying attention on what the credit policy is will be beneficial. Okay.
Letters of recommendation. This is so exciting for me as I have written a few this year, but I had always just been on the receiving end of them and had no sense of appreciation for how much work goes into them. So when you're reading on, and I'll give you two perspectives because I think it's interesting to know as the writer what the perspective is, and as the reader what they're trying to search for. And so as the reader at a highly selective institution, some of the things that we were looking for in the letters of recommendation, we would actually ask for two. And one was a teacher recommendation that we were looking for. So someone who taught the student in the classroom could speak to the student's ability academically, could speak to their collaboration with others academically, could speak to how they deal with feedback, things of that nature. And oftentimes those letters of recommendation centered around a story, to be quite honest, of typically an interaction that they had with a student, or kind of a synopsis of the experience of having that student in the classroom. And so that often came from the teacher. We also asked for a counselor perspective. So whether it's a counselor that is a college counselor, oftentimes would give that perspective. And that would be more of the 30,000-foot view, I think is the only way to phrase it, of how is the student not only engaging in the classroom, but who are they in the school community? Who are they when they're not at their high school? What are some of the influencing factors in their life that are really important? what are things that they're interested in? And sometimes those can center on a story too, but oftentimes it's kind of that wide spotlight that's showing you kind of pictures in the student's life. And so all of these are really just that third-party perspective that hopefully endorses and reinforces the other portions of your application. And so the context piece is what's most important in these letters, and being thoughtful about who you ask as a recommendation or as someone to recommend you, I think is where you should spend a lot of time early on in kind of junior year, thinking about, do I want a math or science teacher because I'm applying to a technical engineering based school? Do I want more of the social sciences, humanities represented? Highly selective schools may ask for 2 letters of recommendation, one from each discipline, one from the math and science and one from the humanities side. So then you have to source at least 2 of them. And so it's important to ask those questions or be aware of it on the websites, but those context pieces hopefully feed in to the rest of your application context. I had something else to say, but I'm forgetting right now. But letters of recommendation are something that I would say you need to ask for well in advance. Your high school might give you parameters about when to ask and how to ask, and be really thoughtful and receiving that. And make sure you follow the directions. That's what I've also realized.
And I will say, and we talked, and Amy did a great job talking about this slide here. What I will say about letters of recommendations, right? I wrote them for a long time, and now I'm back to reading them, is to be very thoughtful about who you ask and how I was a teacher. My mother is a teacher. My 3 brothers are teachers. And yes, we are just a teaching family over here. And I will say, we have had family conversations where a student has asked, and I'm like, they were disruptive in class. They were always late. They didn't participate. And as a family, we would say no, right? Like that's just who we were. Like, no, I can't write a letter of recommendation for you. And I'm going to use this as a teaching moment to let you know why. Some schools are so large, you don't really have that privilege of being able to go and ask another teacher. And so that teacher may not know you. And if they do know you, they don't know anything great about you. And so like Amy says, be very thoughtful of who you're going to ask to write a letter of recommendation. And is this a person, I would used to tell my students to ask, will you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation? Right. And even sometimes students would email me and say, Ms. Fleming, I really enjoyed when you taught about X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, oh, great, I can put this in my letter of recommendation. And so be very thoughtful about who you ask. I know it's harder with virtual school and Zoom, but I read a letter today and the teacher honestly said, when we were on Zoom, they were always on time. They never had their camera off. They were always actively engaged in my discussion. So it can be something that small where you may think, oh, it's just virtual, I'll turn off my camera for the day. And you'll never know when you might need to ask someone to write that letter of recommendation because a teacher may quit or retire and you lose contact with 2 of your teachers. Now you're stuck with the other, well, not stuck, but now you have the other 2. So are you making a good impression for letters of recommendation? So that's really important. So we talked about this. Oh, supplements. Some schools will allow you to have a supplemental letter recommendation. It's important to read and see if they allow a supplement. And that is, what will that additional letter add to your application? Is it someone that you had an internship with, or that you were involved in a community service or a church or a temple, or you were in an orchestra? Like, it has to be something different that is, if it's just another teacher, the college has asked for how many teachers they want. And so that supplement needs to have a different angle, a different point of view.
Yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think one year, and we joked about this at Michigan, but it was a real story, and it was something you only have a finite amount of time as an application reader to get through each student's application. And that's why you ask for specific things, is because you are really trying to get a picture through these different avenues. And one year we had a student who did think that more was better and submitted 46 recommendation letters.
No,
46. I almost fell off my chair. I was like, how am I going to read all of these? And more importantly, exactly to your point, Sarbeth, what else are you adding to the application that is giving me more perspective, something different? It ends up becoming redundant, and that detracts from the other pieces of the application, unfortunately, especially when I worked at a school that got 70,000 applications and we had to move through them. And so it was one of those portions that we thought about and we really wanted to double down on. This is an easy mistake to make that you want to avoid, because, and we're getting to the next piece, which is the most important piece beyond your academics, is your own student voice. We didn't have enough time to read that student's essays because we were reading 46 letters of recommendation. And so if you remember nothing else about letters of rec, remember that anecdote, because that, I think, is very representative of how it can go really wrong.
Absolutely. And so, poll time. So I have another poll. So let's see, what do we know about extracurricular activities? And so I will give 1 minute for this poll, and just want to know, what activity is given more weight in the college application process? And so we can, as a group, just go in and answer these questions. That would be so helpful. And we'll start talking about extracurricular activities. Great. Okay, I see some. Okay.
We move on to, there is a question about rec.
Okay, yes, you can do that while I'm looking at this poll.
Yes, so one person's asking, can people other than counselors and teachers, such as family, friends who's a university professor, write letters of recommendation? The true answer to that is yes, anyone can write one, sure. I think it's important to know and to ask yourself, what role does this play? If the person who you're talking about, the family friend who is a university professor, and I'm assuming that's at said institution student is interested in, if that person does not know the student personally, it's probably not a good use of a letter of recommendation. It is one of those things that seems superficial. It seems forced. And honestly, it doesn't reflect poorly on the student at all, but it's also not adding anything important to the application. Many people are connected to university personnel and things of that nature. That's not something that I would say is influencing an application in a positive way, but it's also not detracting from it.
Absolutely. Okay, and so I'm going to end this poll and I will share the results. So what activity is given more weight in your college application? And the majority of you got it right. They are seen equally. There is not a golden, I have a child, and so Amy, you will start doing this soon, quoting lots of things from lots of kid movies. But there is not a golden ticket as Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. They're all seen equally. We want to know the student in the context of who they are. So the second question, extracurricular activities, colleges give weight to school leadership positions over outside school extracurriculars? Absolutely not. If you are student government president, congratulations. If you are the head, manager at Chick-fil-A night shift, congratulations. If you are the oldest of 5, congratulations. They are all doing a lot. And so colleges are looking for the transferable skills and not the necessary label.
Okay. Absolutely.
All right, so let's go. Extracurricular activities.
Yeah, so extracurriculars are one of the more fun pieces of the process because we get to see a little bit about how the student spends their time when they're not in class. And this can be a student, and people talk about different types of students. They're like, oh, well-rounded students are the best type of students. Well, no, that's one type of student. Then we also have things, if you want to get, complete the metaphor, there are pointy students. And pointy students are, someone who does one thing all the time and they do it really well. And it's something that takes up their whole life outside of school. And so oftentimes there's this conversation about like, which one's better, which one's more advantageous? Well, neither of them. It's about your student. It's about who they are. It's about them discovering things. I had a student in my office this morning and she was looking through her resume of activities. And she goes, well, I did this freshman year and figured out I really didn't like it. So then I did this sophomore year and I figured out I didn't like it. And then I did this junior year and I figured out I loved it. So I'm doubling down on that and I'm really excited. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have a toddler who's joining in. Where are you going? And so,
he's going to try lots of different things as he gets older.
Oh, I know. So it's so important that your students understanding why they're doing things and they're following things that they're truly interested in. I had another student in my office yesterday that said to me, what should I do over the summer? What's going to look good? I said, that's a really interesting question, but it's not the right question. I said, I know that you want to make sure you position yourself appropriately and you want to do everything to make sure that you're getting into the schools that you're really excited about. But colleges, if you do things just for colleges, it reads like a list. It doesn't read like something that you're excited about, that you're passionate about. We want things that you really enjoy, that you can tell a story around, that you can really talk us through. Why are you spending your time doing this thing or these things? And so this is a roundabout way of saying, encourage your student or students in the room, lean into the things that you're really enjoying, start asking more questions about it. Think about how you can use that thing to make more of an impact in your community or with individuals. Really assess that piece of why am I doing this and how can I make it better? Those are the things that college admissions offices want to see. And so when you're doing the extracurricular portion of the Common App or the any other application, an institutional based app, they're going to ask you to kind of list what you've been doing. And so you want to keep track, have an informal resume that you keep track of throughout high school. And you can record time also that I think is really important of how much time am I investing in this. And keep in mind, I'm talking about things that are not just sports, not just performing arts, not just things at school. Tell me about your part-time job. Tell me about your significant family responsibilities and characterize them for me. I don't live your life. So the more you can let me in, and so I can understand the scope of it, that helps me understand the impact. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to sort through on the other side of the desk.
Absolutely. And so extracurriculars, I will say, in fact, before we start, I'm going to go back a slide. Extracurriculars, and I told Amy this when I spoke to her, when back almost at least 2 decades, close to 3 decades ago, when I applied to college, they had 3 categories of extracurriculars. It was academics, athletics, and other, right? And that's what you had to fall into one of those 3 categories. The next slide, I'm going to show you different categories. These categories are on the Common App, on the applications now. All of these different dance, cultural, debate, environmental clubs, family responsibilities, right? Career-oriented, LGBTQA, religious, research. These are categories that they're giving you to say, hey, do you do any of this? And then fill an other, right? These categories cover it because, like I mentioned before, we're looking for transferable skills. How will this student be part of our community once they come to college? And one is not better than the other. It's just, what are you doing when you're not looking at Netflix, pretty much? And I can't even say when you're not on the computer, because, Amy, I have seen so many content creators as an extracurricular, right? Yes, influencers.
One student told me she's TikTok famous today, and I actually saw her TikTok, and she has tens of thousands of views. And I was like, oh my goodness, what is happening?
One student was like, oh, I've had like 2.5 million views. And I'm like, oh my. So it's not even just when you're not, because you can be on your computer and you're a content creator. And so, or esports, right? Esports is a huge thing out there now. And some colleges even have that as a major. So pretty much when you're not just chilling, looking at Netflix, what are you doing? And parents, guardians, this is a time to help out. I was helping my daughter with an application the other day for something, and she was reading it. And I was like, don't forget you did this. Because I remember I used to have to rush from work to pick her up to take her. And she was like, oh, I forgot. I didn't. And so really listing those extracurricular activities, because by the time you're a senior and you're applying, you're going to forget, right? And some may not be important, but others may be, like Amy mentioned, they may be things, catalysts that then moved you to something else. And so paying attention to all of that. So again, one is not better than the other. Essays.
Essays are one of the most exciting things. I think any reader, this is what they live for on the application. They hope for this. When you're talking about writing, and this shouldn't be, and I say this as a college counselor, but some students are genuinely intimidated by this, and that's okay. Other students, this is so exciting because creative writing comes really naturally to them. What the goal is for the student to be able to share something that is whatever they want the reader to know, whatever they think is important about them as a person, in thinking through the lens of, I'm ready for my next step. I'm going into a community. What is something that I think is important? We have read everything under the sun. Let me tell you, there are some things that we always kind of like typical do's and typical don'ts, and we won't necessarily go through each example of them right now. But I think it's important to know that the prompts are everything. They're things to generate ideas mostly, because the last prompt is other. Write about anything you want. And so many students just pick that one, but this is kind of like an idea generator, and really just trying to find things to help students focus in on being reflective, being thoughtful about a moment in their life that they think maybe was transformative or impactful or not. I mean, one of the best essays that I ever read was purely about libraries. And I am not a person who is particularly interested in libraries, to be quite honest. But after I walked back from that essay, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to think about libraries a little bit more, because the student used it as the connector between their travels, how they thought about the world. They're a little bit more introverted, they're a little bit more intellectual, and how the libraries that they visited all across the world through their family's travels and moves have been impactful on the student and how it shaped their worldview, all in 650 words. And so that was always kind of wild to me, is the topic doesn't always have to be interesting to the reader. It just needs to be personal and about the student. And so that's what's most interesting. Essays are something that at highly selective institutions, they're expecting some thought and a lot of reflection. They're asking, as I referred to earlier on in the presentation, oftentimes the personal statement are looking for kind of values or thoughts or reflection. And then they also might ask other questions that are specific to their school about, why do you want to go here? Why do you want this particular major? And that's why, as Sarbeth talked about earlier, doing thoughtful research and keeping track of it is really important, because it helps keep it a little bit cleaner and less jumbled, where you're not confusing Davidson and Wake Forest. Those are important things, is to make sure you're not mentioning some other school names in their essays, those types of things. But the essays are a really great place to, if you're skilled at writing, or you have a really interesting story to share, where you can use it to your advantage to win over the reader.
Absolutely. What I will say about the essays is focus, make sure it's your voice. Parents, guardians, trust me, I know it is in my former life, I was an attorney. Before I got into higher ed, I was an attorney, did the law thing. And my daughter just did a project for her civics class on law cases that dealt with education, right? Ones that I knew front and back, could quote which justice said what, right? And so she did her presentation, Amy, to me, and I wanted to say, oh, you should add this and take this, and here's another case. But then I didn't, right? Because it's her presentation. It is not my presentation. It is her presentation. And the last thing I want to do, and people can unintentionally do this when they're helping students with their essay, is you are taking away the student's self-confidence that their essay is about them. They're the expert on them. And so when they're sitting down and writing 650 words about a personal statement, and as a parent, guardian, or whoever comes in and says, oh, what if you do X, Y, and Z? You're telling them that their voice is not strong enough to get them into the colleges that they're considering. Versus now, when my daughter did say, Mom, can you read this for typos? I did just that. I did not add any suggestions. I read it for typos and circled the little typos and did that. But you really want to make sure that you are allowing your student to give their voice. Amy and I have been doing this long enough, and we both can attest that it is so easy to see when a 17 and 18-year-old is not writing that essay. The voice change, the verbiage change, like, wait, something doesn't seem right here. And that's the last thing that you want to do when helping a student with their essay, because they've done the hard work, they've taken the rigorous classes, they've done the extracurriculars. The last thing you want to do is to take their voice away from them, and that be the red flag in the application. So trust their voice, trust the process. A personal statement is not a thesis. A personal statement is not the AP English paper. The personal statement is just that. Who are you? I want to know who you are. And so making sure that they have the agency over their voice to tell the story. No essay is going to be perfect. No essay is going to get a student into every school. That's just not going to happen. But every essay will be perfect if they can tell their authentic voice, because it's perfectly them.
Yes. And you never want them to have any regrets.
Right. Amy mentioned this, and this is great. What I will say about the specific, read the question, start with a blank slate. Schools will say, look, Emory, our question is, what academic areas do you want to major in? We want to know what areas, because if you're saying areas that we don't have, then it's like, wait, do they know us? We don't have that program here. So one school where I worked, our question was just why? Why are you applying to us? We want to know that you know and you have researched us. And because it's so easy to apply to so many schools, taking the time, knowing that your main essay will go to every school, colleges are spending time to ask you very specific questions for reasons. So making sure that you're answering the prompt that they're asking. And these are just some helpful hints. There was one question in the chat that I'll say out loud. If you have any other, please put them in the Q&A. We want to make sure that we are addressing those. But what I will say about the question in the chat, the number of APs, how many APs should I take to be seen rigorous? Every school is different. Some schools will only have, students can only take APs 2 as a junior, 3 as a senior, and that's it. Some schools you can start as early as your 9th grade taking APs. College reps, college counselors, for example, I have New Jersey as my territory. I was telling you this earlier. I've read New Jersey, I think since first time in 2004 was the first time I read for New Jersey. So I have the profiles. I read the profiles. I understand. At this particular school, here's how many APs a student can take. And so if they're taking 5 and the average is usually 4, I know that they are taking more than what's offered. But if the average is 15 and they're taking 2, I know they're not taking a rigorous course. So if you go to your high school or looking on the website and looking for a high school profile, it will let you know what colleges know about the schools. So it's the context, right? It depends.
Yeah. The context piece is so important. Like you were talking about knowing your area and what's offered. At PACE, we explicitly write exactly what students have access to and what's considered a rigorous, like the most rigorous schedule. And we put like a marker on it of it's 6 APs or 8 APs or whatever it is. But I lived and worked in Florida for many, many years. And Florida, it's kind of, you can pick and choose as you go, and you can take sometimes a combination of AP, IB, and ACE classes down in Cypress Bay, and you can have over 20 honors APs or AP, IB, and ACE classes kind of as a jumble mix, anywhere from 9th through 11th grade or 9th through 12th grade. And so it's important for you to know that highly selective institutions are doing that legwork and that research. Oftentimes, if you're a student that they're really excited about, they take the time to figure out things about your high school. And so one of the things that I did at Michigan is we used to have institutional data from previous years. And so what would come up with the application is, this student is at this high school. Oftentimes, students who have the most rigorous schedule will have X amount of honors, APs, IBs, elective courses. And so the institutional record was actually in there, which was pretty cool.
One piece of advice I will leave you with, and I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so hopefully we're covering everything, is knowing that highly selective institutions are accepting typically 25% or fewer of their applicant pool. Please don't let any decision dictate your self-worth. I spoke to a college a couple of years, well, actually about 2 years ago now, and they literally told me, Sarbeth, we could accept every student with a 36 or 1600 on the ACT and still have too many yeses. Mm-hmm. So it's not saying anything about who you are as an individual if a school says yes or no. It is just that there are so many wonderful competitive students out there that realistically there are only so many seats in a first year incoming college class. So making sure that you are strategic when you're applying. I've had students before and said, I'm only applying to schools. And I'm like, if those 4 schools say no, because they're all highly selective. And so you're saying they're all accepting less than 25%. That doesn't give you a better percentage overall. That doesn't add up to 100%. That means 25% in each individual school, which means you could end up with a no. So what is a school that's not as selective that you really enjoy, right? It's not pick a school, oh, I guess I'll go there if I have to. You really don't have to go to college. And so it's about finding the places that you really enjoy. And so a highly selective school may be your top choices or some of your favorite schools, but also knowing that there are other great schools out there where you could be happy and content. And as a family, supporting those schools, right? And saying, yes, if Emory, I'll use Emory since I work there. If Emory is your top choice, wonderful, we support you, but let's find some other schools that as a family we love as well, and that you can see yourself thriving there. And so that's what I'll say about the highly selective institutions. Any questions before we end for the evening? Because I am going to go and put in the chat, like I mentioned earlier, that link to the previous.
Oh, we just had a question come in on the question A box. Are leadership roles given in classes looked the same as leadership roles for extracurricular activities? I don't know. Maybe I don't know what it means in classes. I don't know how they would be represented. And so I think, I don't know the context of this question, but I think that it's important for people to know, we only know what we know through the transcript and the application. And so if things are not represented in those areas, college admissions officers will not be seeing them. So making sure that what you're referring to, if there's a leadership role in a classroom, that it's outlined in a rec letter or something of that nature, or editorial head in a yearbook class, for example. So yes, those are just as important as any leadership role. Anything beyond the classroom is kind of looked at equally in that regard. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight and taking an hour to hang out with us. We are so appreciative of your time and hopefully you learned some things about highly selective admissions, and I had fun presenting with you, Sarbeth.
Oh, great seeing you, Amy. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. I put the link in the chat for the previous recordings, and this recording will actually also go up on the SACAC website. So hopefully you got some information. We have our next one is March 15th, and that is a junior college planning. So what should juniors be doing right now? And then the end of March, we're going to have one that is about helping underclass students think of financial aid. That is something that will sneak up on you. And so there are a couple of different ones, and you can go back and look at the previous recording. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Good night.